Hey everybody, Cybertal with you. We just finished Game 9 of the World Chess Championship match. One of the most tragic games in World Chess Championship history. Nepomniachtchi was white. C4, Ramesh Babu Pragnada was the ceremonial first mover before this game. He brought out one C4. I got a little bit excited, but I was sort of doubtful because C4 is my main repertoire. But Nepomniachtchi let it go and just hit the clock and send it over to Carlsen. So we see the English opening. I think this is an excellent idea beyond my own personal biases being my repertoire. He's gotten precisely nothing in his games with E4 so far. Carlsen has really equalized without too much problem. So the fact that Nepomniachtchi went out looking for something a little bit different, I think, was a good sign for the game. E6. This seems like the main fashion at the top. It seems like the top players trust this move more than others. Black tries to keep it in range where it can still transpose to a Catalan opening. G3, this is pure English territory. This is the move that white plays if he really is okay with keeping things in pure English-ready territory. Knight C3 still keeps the option to transpose to a bunch of other openings. Actually, against this specific move order from black, I prefer it a little bit more. If black plays d5, then we're very happy to just play d4. And this is a queen's gambit decline where black really hasn't managed to deke us out of any of our options. We still have the option of playing a queen's gambit exchange variation where this knight isn't committed to f3, which is a big deal in some lines. If black plays knight f6 instead, we still have full flexibility. We could play d4 and go for a Nimzo if we're okay with that. We could also play e4. This is the Mechanis. This keeps it within pure English opening territory. This would be an opening Nepomniachtchi would be very happy to play, since he's more or less going all out for a win from this point. Position like this is all theory. And this is a very imbalanced position. White has hanging pawns, but he also has a lot more scope for his pieces. The black queen's going to lose some more time moving. A very nice position for white if he's looking for an aggressive game. So against a specific move order, I think playing for win, maybe knight c3 is the best. But g3, I mean, it's my main repertoire, so I can't complain too much. Perfectly good move. Bishop g2. d4. This is a fairly controversial move, but it's also a very principled. Victor Korchnoi very famously hated the reverse Benoni, and he completely advocated for playing an early d4 and just had complete contempt for the opening. He would just gobble up the space and eat as much as he could. But black does run a risk that he ends up in a reverse Benoni down at least 1 or 2 tempi, or ends up in an unfavorable Benko gambit. So, very imbalancing choice from Carlsen, and sort of shows that he's not one to shy away from a fight. He's not going to openly play for a draw passively. He's going to still play what he thinks are the best moves. Knight f3, this would be the moment where if you're looking for an imbalance, maybe b4 is an interesting possibility. I would certainly at least think about it and have some preparation for it. e5 looks like the best if black plays c5. This, in my opinion, this is a very nice Benko Benoni position for white. You know, white's not even going to be down a pawn, but he's still going to have this very nice open b file. The bishop has complete scope down to that weak pawn of b7. It's a very nice position for white. But e5 looks best. Knight a6. Taking advantage of the pin here, we can't take that knight. d3, of course, if the bishop chooses to take, we fork and we win that bishop at b7. And this is a genuine imbalance. Black has a good edge in central space here. We have a nice, white has a nice, I say we, because this is the sort of position I'm used to playing as white. White has a nice queenside grip, and this bishop on g2 looks especially beautiful. This is a genuine imbalance. This is going to be a very interesting game to come. Knight e3, though, perfectly fine. Knight c6. c5 is a little bit less good here. It looks straightforward, but heads more towards positions where you'll truly be in a reversed opening, 1 or 2 tempi down at least. e3, this is the normal reverse Benoni move, and this truly is a reverse Benoni here. White's already 1 tempo up because he's white. Once black plays e5, which is more or less mandatory, it'll be 2 tempi down. it'll be a difficult position to play for black, just because the modern Benoni is so sharp, and adding 2 tempi to the quiver for the Benoni side is quite dangerous. So knight c6, it's more the Schmidt Benoni, where we keep that c-pawn back and focus on development. In my opinion, this is best for black. Castle. Bishop c5, in my opinion, the best move. So the bishop immediately comes out, reinforces this important central post on d4, and still maintains scope to lock down any b4 points. Knight f6 is still possible, but black can quickly get into trouble if he plays routine moves here. e5 is a common move here, but it's just flat out bad. b4, this is a very common thrust for white in these sorts of positions, and here it works out very well tactically. So if the knight takes, we just take an e5. We traded our b pawn for the vital e pawn. That's an incredibly good trade for white. But if black takes with the bishop, this is where the tactics come in. The knight takes on e5, and then we check on an a4 and hit this bishop on b4. So if the knight drops back to guard, then we trade off. And white has a humongous advantage. Just these pawns are completely shattered for black. White's going to win at least one of these pawns at some point. Bishop d7 is best, but after the queen takes back, this is also a huge advantage for white. White's got the bishop pair. White's got nice pressure on the queen side. The queen is cutting off castling from black right now. This is a very nice position. So bishop c5 immediately, I think, is the best move order here. Just immediately developing, supporting this bastion on d4. This is quite good. Knight f6, just continuing developing. Knight b2, not the only move, but it might be the best move. Bishop g5 is another common Benoni theme here. In these sorts of Benoni positions, this dark squared bishop, for black it would be the light squared bishop, it doesn't really have a great square. It doesn't really have a clear role. So a lot of times it'll just come out to g5 or g4 if black, and trade itself off quickly so we don't have to deal with it anymore. This position could go this certain way. b4, any other move just sort of gets slowly squeezed, so I sort of like this pawn jab from white. And I think this is sufficient compensation for white. White's going to have normal Benko compensation on the b file. He have a nice open b file, he'll have a target on b7. All of his pieces are fairly active. This looks okay for white. Knight b2 is more straightforward, though. a5. So, very typical move. The a-pawn comes out to lock down at any b4 break. Knight b3. This is the only move. If white plays lackadaisically, he just starts getting squeezed. b4 is not a feasible pawn break anymore. Black has too many pieces on that square, and he still owns the a file. This rook being an a8. This is a very nice edge for black. So knight b3 is necessary, and then e3, and that's the whole point behind knight b3. If we didn't have this e3 resource, knight b3 would be worse than useless. So takes. Bishop c5. We have to move our bishop away. We can't lose the bishop pair in a position like this. d4, and now white gets his pawn moving. If you put this bishop on, say, c3, this would actually be a very nice position for white. White would have a very solid edge here. But black's just in time to secure counterplay here. So a4, kicking this awkward knight on b3. Knight c5. This is pretty much forced. If white just retreats the knight routinely, rook d8, and this pawn is dropping off. So knight c5 is more or less forced. a3, this was maybe a chance for... I'm not so sure this is a great move. It doesn't lead to an immediate loss for black, but I sort of feel like white's able to make some progress after this. Maybe e5 is a slightly better choice here. Try to undermine the outpost on c5 for whites. That looks entirely reasonable. a3 meets with... First off, Nepomniachtchi played bx-a3, which is, in my opinion, not the best way forward. It looks like b4 here. And this move actually makes a lot of sense. We keep the a file closed, so this black rook on a8 isn't able to gain the same sort of activity that it does in a game. If black takes on b4, first off, rook d8, we're able to protect that pawn on b4. And then white goes through with this d5 push, and this is more or less a four sequence here. And white has a superb position here. This pawn is isolated, but in exchange, white has excellent mobilization. Most of the black pieces are still asleep. This black rook in a8 just doesn't have the same activity with that pawn being stuck in a3. In fact, it's going to be stuck guarding that a3 pawn, most likely. Knight xb4 is critical. So rook b1. Notice if the knight takes an a2, we just trap the knight, and that knight's dead now. b6. And rook b5. And black has to return the pawn here. And white gets a nice initiative for free. If black takes on d4, this is just losing immediately. We're attacking the rook on a8. There's no safe space for the rook to move to. This is just completely losing. So, this looked like Nepomniachtchi finally got a real chance to get a good initiative from the position. Rook xa3, rook d8 was played. Rook xa3 looks a little bit more flexible. There are some positions where black can play bishop d7 and rook fa8 immediately, or we more or less save a position, save a tempo in rook d8. But very small detail. Knight f6. This seems like it's correct. The pawn on a3 isn't going anywhere. If black takes an a3 immediately, this looks like a little bit of something for white. White's really well arranged. He's got this d5 pawn break in his pocket. Again, always look to your pawn breaks when you're trying to calculate activity. Black is still perfectly fine, but subjectively, white might be able to squeeze something from this position. Queen xa3. So I think it is a better idea for the queen to activate herself in this particular position. The c4 pawn can be weak after a queen b4 thrust. Plus, in terms of pure numbers, we have 2 pieces on the a-file instead of just 1. So this is an equal position, but it's an imbalanced equal. So this is exactly the sort of position that you'd be happy with as Nepomniachtchi. At least you're getting some play out of the opening. h4, typical little micro-improving move. It's not hugely consequential, but we prevent g5 in certain positions. We control the g5 square. Bent Larsen was famous for saying, when in doubt, move a rook pawn. Thus it is in this position. White sort of just passes it back to black and asks him to commit to something. Bishop d7, this actually gives white a little bit. I think knight a5 is a slightly more accurate move. Just immediately creating the threat of knight xb3. So queen f1 looks best. This is one way it can go. Knight e5 is the most accurate move, so black is sort of forced to take on b3 finally. And white's going to get his pawn back. But after, say, a move like c... I'll probably just move there instead. This looks equal. Black's got the pawn break c5 ready to go. And he's achieving good play against both of these pawns here. Plus a d4's pawn is hanging. So, this looks like a perfectly fine position for black. Bishop d7 allows a little bit of something. Queen e3. If white takes... bishop e8 is a very nice defensive move. You often see this in the queen's gambit decline, where the bishop just drops back and makes way for the rook on the d-file. If white trades twice on c6, those c-pawns aren't weaknesses. And the fact that black's adding activity on the b-file as well... I would actually give black a little bit of an edge here, just because black is achieving so much activity from this position. After bishop e8, probably this is better. The rook just micro-improves itself. It's on a slightly better square here. I think white's just a little bit better. It's nothing dramatic, but I think white is slightly for choice here. Trade the knights, and then knight g4, pretty much forced. We don't want to move the knight somewhere passive where it's just clogging the position up. Queen e1. Carlsen actually admitted that he blundered and overlooked this move. It's not hugely consequential, though. I mean, this position is still quite balanced. But the alternatives for white are definitely worse. Queen c5, and then bishop c6, and suddenly black is making a lot of progress. Knight b7 is more or less sort of forced. If bishop takes, white sort of has to let that pawn drop off. We try to save that pawn. Black has overwhelming activity here. If the knight takes on b7, we're forced to take on d8. If the king takes, black is just winning here. Black has a humongous initiative. f2 is hanging, e5 is hanging, a2 is hanging, c4 is weak. White's position is suddenly collapsing. So save the bishop. And notice that this bishop is completely trapped in this knight on d8. And black is playing for two results here. This a-pawn is quite strong for white, but the rest of white's position is quite weak. This e-pawn is weak, the c-pawn is weak. The very strong bishop on f3 controls the landing square for the a-pawn. So this a-pawn isn't as big a threat as it otherwise could be. This isn't overwhelming for black at all, but I think black is certainly for choice here. So queen e1, Carlsen said he overlooked it, but it just sort of keeps the balance. Queen x c1, h5, rook d3 is another way. It sort of immediately liquidates using activity. Bishop b7, rook a3. Just notice that all of black's pieces are more or less active than their all the black's pieces are more active than their white counterparts, especially these black rooks here. The rooks on a3 and d3 are far more active than the rooks on a1 and e1, and this gets the material back immediately. Knight c5, and then we take advantage of that pin on b3. And this is more or less equal. You could play on for another 40 moves from here, but this is more or less equal. h5 keeps a little bit more tension in the position. Rook a4, rook a7 might be a little bit more accurate. And then play rook a3 here, now that the bishop's dropped back to f3. Now f3 isn't available from white, so this knight's a bit more secure. And black has good play here. Complete compensation for the pawn. But rook a4, again, keeps a little bit more tension in the position. It's impressive to me that Carlsen, even though he's the one that's 2 points up in the match, he's not shying away from complicated positions. He always plays what he thinks to be the best move. He doesn't play that hackneyed prevent defense when he's up a couple of touchdowns. He always plays for complications if he thinks it's the best way to go forward in the position. And here we get to the really tragic moments. I think anyone of good conscience and moral decency feels horrible for Nepomniachtchi here. Nepomniachtchi played c5, and this definitely isn't funny anymore. I mean, this is the sort of blunder that's, for reference, I'm 2400. I would feel bad if I fell for this. I know most experts or masters would feel bad if they fell for this and feel like they should have noticed it. And Nepomniachtchi is one of the best players in the world, one of the best attacking and calculating players in the world. So for him to miss a move like this and his previous blunders over the past 3 or 4 days, he just hasn't gotten his bearings back after Game 6. It seems like Game 6, instead of being just one game, has sort of consumed the past 4 games for Nepomniachtchi. It's completely shattered his sense of stability. White has many moves here, but f3 seems to be the most straightforward. And this is equal, but white might be able to press a little bit here. Notice that the knight takes on g3, that's just losing. And white suddenly completely winning. I mean, black's not going to play this. Black can just take on c4. And again, this is equal, but white has a little bit of an imbalance with which he can press. It's most likely going to be a draw. But c5. I mean, it's looking to be greedy. It's looking to save this pawn, but of course, c6. And again, you have to feel bad for Nepomniachtchi. In the press conference after the game, he said that he didn't notice this move until Carlsen played it, which shows you how completely gone his sense of calculation and stability has been. Because I think anyone looking at the position fresh, that would be the move they first wordly calculate to see if their bishop is somehow trapped. And in this position, it is certainly trapped. So f3. If we try to save the bishop, the other rook just slides over, and now the bishop's even pinned. Yeah, that's just lost as well. So f3. Rook e4 was played again. If rook a b1, there's just no way out. The move before, there is another move, but if rook e b1, you don't even have to attack the bishop immediately. You can just play knight c5. This is just... There's not much to analyze in this position, unfortunately. It's just the bishop's just trapped and it's getting lost, and the game is gone after that. So rook e4 was played. Rook b8, that's the only move, but it's not a hard move to find. Rook b6, I mean, Nepomniachtchi is looking for some complications. Maybe this would work in bullets, you know, somehow sneak your a-pawn through if your opponent's down to 30 seconds, but not with 40 minutes left on the clock. Or Carlsen even had about 5 minutes left, but that's more than enough. You know, white can try to push, but the knight's always able to get back to stopping tactics, so we don't have knight c8 anymore. The knight just comes to e7. There's no way to hop the knight through. And black can just slowly untangle with moves like f6, king f8. Bring the other pieces over to help to contain the queen side. This is just dead. So rook b6 was played, but this is just another pawn to take. Now next g3, I think this is the strongest move. It looks on the surface more risky, but again, it shows how Magnus never shies away from complications. He always plays what he thinks is the strongest move, regardless of circumstances or risk. He never shies away from a complicated position if he thinks that's the absolute best move in the position. And why not? I mean, if you can take another pawn, just take it. Knight d4 would be the practical method if you're afraid of tricks and you're short on time. You know, just bring the knight back to b5 immediately, but Carlsen sees that everything's in time. Knight a4. a7 looks a little bit scary at first. So rook a6, this is preparing knight a4 and knight b6. Of course, if we play knight a4 first, just drops a pawn. But knight e2 check gets back in time. Knight c3. And now white can't even complete the plan of knight a4. The knight's going to hop to b5. We take the pawn, and that's dead. So knight a4 first. c5, just drop this weak c-pawn back to activate this bishop. Rook d8, of course, if rook a8, we're suddenly in time to queen. Actually, funnily enough, this position is only slightly better for black. But Carlsen would have no interest in that position. Knight c5, if knight b6, just bishop c6, that's in time to stop. We're basically giving the piece back. But white's 2 pawns down, it's going to be 3 pawns down after we take an h4. f3 is weak, e5 is weak, this knight and a8's completely out of play. This is also completely losing for white. So, Nepomniachtchi takes on c5. Rook a8. And there's not even a way for white to pretend to continue. So Nepomniachtchi resigned here, which I think is completely proper. I mean, you can't even come up with a move for white to continue. I think unless you're a sociopath or you take a special delight out of schadenfreude, any morally normal person feels awful for Nepomniachtchi. There's no such thing as deserve in chess. There's no luck in chess, so all the wins and losses and draws we receive, we have complete control over. It's not like poker where there's an element of luck that you can blame. You're the one coming up with the moves, and it's only your brain to blame. But seeing this sort of tragedy unfolds at the height of someone's career, fighting for the world title, and it's not as though Nepomniachtchi is losing in these sort of epic battles where he's taking the fight to Carlsen and Carlsen's heroically defending against brilliant combinations. If Nepomniachtchi were losing like that, and he were 3 points down after 3 games like that, we would at least say well done. You know, very interesting. But seeing Nepomniachtchi lose with these sort of elementary blunders, you just feel it's a terrible loss for chess, and it's a terrible loss for Nepomniachtchi. I mean, he seems like a genuinely decent human being, and a decent human being deserves a lot better than this. The match is more or less over. I mean, Carlsen is up 3 points now with 5 games to go. Carlsen hasn't lost 3 games in the past 5 or 6 years, I believe. The match is more or less over. You hope that Nepomniachtchi recovers his sense of stability and balance. I mean, you hope he takes a nice vacation after this match. But then you hope he gets back on the horse and recovers his sense of brilliance, because he's a brilliant player. When he plays at his best, it's hard to find a better attacker on the world stage right now, and we certainly need a lot more interesting play at the top. But seeing him lose like this is just heartbreaking. So, to his peril, we have another game tomorrow, and Carlsen will be white. I don't think Carlsen will press for more. I think even he might feel a bit bad for Nepomniachtchi, but who am I to say? He might think this is the time to just completely finish things off and press for a win. So if you're Nepomniachtchi, you have to come to the board ready to play tomorrow. So Carlsen's white tomorrow. We'll see you then.